Good morning. Oh, sorry there's been such a delay on this S5. I was just, I've been so busy. I've been so busy with IB and AP. But now it's time. Okay, so S5. Now, S5 is one of my favorite lessons to teach in class because I gather data from my class itself. So I'm looking at these notes from a few years ago, and it's so funny. So I'll show you. Let me give you the title. So S5 is about histograms, grouped data, and cumulative frequency. Now, what I always do, which is so sad, but I always ask the class, how many hours of sleep did you get last night? So in this time, I wonder if it's more. It'd be really awesome to do like a histogram comparing the sleep that you got today, last night, compared to the sleep that this class got when I made up this, not I didn't make up the data, but when I asked my class at the last time I taught math analysis. So anyway, I should do in our class, I should have it, I should have done, if I would have thought of this ahead of time, we should have gathered some data and found out how many hours of sleep you guys got last night. Maybe I'll do that anyway and make our own. Okay, so these were the answers. So these were the answers one year. Ready? It was 3, 5.5. So let me give you the title. So the title is, I should write it up here. Hours of sleep last night. Hours of sleep last night. Okay, so the first person in the row said 3, then 5.5, then 7, then 6.5, then 5, then 6, 4.5. Let's see, because then I use this data all throughout those notes. Okay, 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7. And then someone got creative. They said, okay, I got 6 hours and 45 minutes last night. So then how would we write that? Okay, so 6 hours, 45 minutes. How are we going to put that? So we're going to have to put that as a fraction, right? So 45 over 60. Okay, so then 5, 4, 5, 6. And then we have another creative person who said 5 hours, 52 minutes. So 52 out of 60. Okay. 7, 5, 8, 5, 7, 6, 5, and 32 minutes over 60. It's so funny. I miss you guys. We would, it's so fun when you guys laugh. Ooh, we have a 4 hours and 25 minutes. So 4 hours and 25 minutes. Now, these are like lack of sleep here. So I guess people had a test and they were studying. Oh, and then this one, 7 hours and 20 minutes. Everybody was jealous. So 7 hours and 20 minutes. Now, when we do this in summer school, it's terrible. It used to be terrible. It'd be like 1, 2. It was horrible. Okay, so let's write all these numbers down. Okay. So these were the times. And let's see if I have the same number that I had in the old notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 36, 37. 37. I had a big class that year. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. Yeah, 37. Wow, 37. That actually has a letter N. So N is 37. So we might as well write that down since we counted. Wow, that was a big class. This year we were at 28, and then we lost some of our people to sports, and then it went down to 22. Okay, so let's see. So when you have a lot of data like this, and imagine you have 1,000 pieces of data, okay? Just looking at the data itself is too overwhelming. You can't really make judgments. Now, it's possible that you want the mean, you want the standard deviation, you want to look at that kind of things, but those are one number. So we want to have graphical representations of these things. Okay, so one way to do this, I should turn the sound off on my phone. I'm expecting a phone call, so I'm going to have to pause when I get to that phone call. Okay, classes. This is called classes. Okay, classes. These are the classes. Okay, then we're going to have a tally. We're going to call this column tally. And this frequencies. Okay, frequencies. Okay, and this is called, we can call this one a grouped frequency table. I should put that on the top. But you don't have to title it each time. But this is a grouped frequency table. Okay. So what are our classes? So in this case, I feel like we wouldn't really want to have every single number listed. So you have to try to think like, what groups do you want? So if you were making groups and it's ages, you know, maybe you want ages 10 to 19, ages 20 to 29, 30 to 39, things like that. So in this case, let's see, what's our lowest? Our lowest is 3. Our highest is just about 8, but not 8. So it seems like if we just went by ones, there wouldn't be too many classes. You probably don't want more than like 6 or 7 classes, and you don't want only 2 classes. You kind of want about 6 or 7, they say in stats. Okay, so what our classes are. Okay, so we're going to call it T. T is time, right? Hours. You get to pick your own letter. So let's have it be greater than or equal to 3, but not 4. So if it's not 4, let's write less than 4. Okay. And then our next one, let's do 4 until, and I like to make it so there's no gaps if I'm making my own classes. If I have somebody else's classes, then sometimes I have to alter theirs so that I can make it a less than or equal to on one side and a less than on the other side, because when there's gaps, it makes it a little more complicated. Okay, so we want to make sure there's no gaps. So if you're making your own, don't make their gaps. And then if somebody else makes it, I will show you how to fix the gaps in later on in the lesson. Okay, 6 less than or equal to T, less than what, 7? And then our last data would be 7 less than or equal to T, less than 8. We don't have any 8, so we don't need another one. Okay, and then when you're actually doing this, there's multiple ways. One way is to find your data and then cross it out. You know, find all the ones in the 3 to 4 range, count them all and cross them out or check mark them as you go. But usually the way to go is you go one by one. So 3, that would be in this category, tally. 5.5, which class would that be in? So that'd be in the 3rd class, so tally, 1. 7, that would be in the bottom class. 6.5, this class. 5 is an equal to, so it's in the 3rd class, not the 2nd class. 6 looks like it's in both the 3rd class and the 4th class, but the 4th class is the one with the equal sign. 4.5, that's in the middle. 5, 2 5s. 6, 7, 6 hours and 45. So that would be here. Now, traditionally you cross it at 5. Okay, and then I'm pointing to each number as I go so that I don't lose track. You can't tell because I'm above my tablet, but I'm basically pointing at the 5. Okay, so 5 would be like that. 4, 5, 6, 5, and then just go one by one. 5. We'll see if I get the same answer as the others. Oh, there is an 8. Oh, dang. I wonder if we didn't notice that last time. Interesting. Okay, we're going to wait on the 8. I'm going to circle it. Decide what to do with the 8 later. Okay, 5. 5, 7, 6, 5, 5, 5, 5, 7, 4. Oh, there's not too many people with a super lack of sleep this year. 7. That'd be this bottom one. 7, 7, 4, 5. Okay, so what I wonder, interesting. Oh, I did. I made another class. So I didn't notice that. Okay, so there is another class. So there's 1. So I just did the 8. So that's okay. So that would be 8 less than or equal to t less than 9. And it's best to do your class widths. Class width is from one class to the next. From 3 to 4, that's plus 1. From 4 to 5, that's plus 1. It's best to make them equal if you can. But sometimes we can't make them equal. You know, because what if you had all of a sudden somebody got 14 hours of sleep? Are you going to have a bunch of 0 classes? Or are you going to try to grab your last class to be 8 all the way to 14? So, and, you know, there's different choices people have when they're making these. Okay, so 1, 4, 15. Frequencies is just counting them up. 7, 9, and 1. Okay, so visually, we can put this in a graph. If you twist your paper sideways, actually, I do this with my tablet in class, but we're not in class. If you twist your tablet sideways, or your head sideways, it kind of looks like a histogram. So it's kind of cool with the tallies if you even them out. Okay, the third class. Okay, the third class. Let's just look some terminology. What is the lowest value? Okay, so that's 5. And what is the highest value in the third class? Well, the highest value is kind of 6, right? But it's a borderline 6, so I'm going to put 6. I'm going to put a little minus after it, but the idea would be that 6 is still not really the highest value in there, but at least it doesn't pass 6. And then the lowest value, see, this is what I mean by no gaps. And then the lowest value here would be 6. And that's actually 6, right? Because this one's just less than 6, I guess, just barely. Okay, there's a term. I don't know if we ask you this in the homework, but it's called modal class. Okay, and modal reminds you of what word? Word mode. So what would mode be? And which is the modal class? Let's look at the list. So I would say the modal class is this one. Okay, so the modal class is this one, which is the third one. And why would that be the modal class? That's because it is the most frequent. And how do you know it's the most frequent? Because it has the highest frequency. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, I'm going to write the no gaps as best. Otherwise, there's a way that you can bridge the gap. Okay. Okay, now when you're graphing this, I'm going to go to some graph paper, but it's very important that you don't do what they're doing now with the coronavirus. Is they're making graphs where if you look at their y-axis, they're not equally spaced out. Now, they're doing that on purpose because they're trying to represent exponential growth. So the y values are real, they're just exponential. So their equal spaces are powers instead of actual equal, say, arithmetic values. Okay, so it's very misleading though, because we usually just look at graphs. We don't look at, it's called a logarithmic graph. We don't look at graphs that way. So when we see that, it's very shocking because you see, oh my gosh, we're almost up to Spain or we're almost up to Italy. And it looks terrible. Or, oh, we're halfway, visually, we're halfway to China. We're not. So when you look at those values, you have to look at the y-axis, and they've made the y-axis exponential. So anyway, the statistics that we're doing now is very timely. It's very important. If you want a graph to really represent something that's not misleading, you want to make sure that your y values are equally spaced. Now you can do these one every, your graph paper has bigger squares than mine, so you could just do every one square is 2. 2 to 14. 14, well, the highest is what, 16, so I can go a little above there. Okay, and this is called a histogram. Okay, a histogram. Histogram is kind of like a bar chart. Okay, so I also want to equally space the right if I can. So this is 1, 2, even though we're not over here until 3. Okay, so 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9. Okay, and then the 3 to 4 class, which is a height of 1, I'm going to make it right here, 3 to 4, and has a height of 1. And then the next class has a height of 4. So I'm going to go over to here. It has a height of 4. And then from 5 to 6, it has a height of 15. This is so skinny. Okay. That one definitely looks higher. From 6 to 7, it's 7. 7 to 8, it's 9. And 8 to 9 is only 1. Okay, so you can visually see the differences between here. So it's very interesting. So we see our modal class. Oh, gotta pause. Okay, so where was I before the phone call? Histogram. Oh, we should label our histogram. So here, let's put hours of sleep. Should put the units and what it is. And then on the y-axis, you just write frequency. Okay, because this is a frequency histogram. So that's it. So this is a histogram, but histograms are frequency. Our frequency. There's no such thing as a non-frequency histogram. Anyway, so it's very cool. Let's see. Now that was our data. So we were taking a look at our data. Now, they're going to ask other questions, and I want to show you an option of what you could do for classes instead of the way that we wrote it here. I want to show you another version. Okay, so now this is the same data, but pretend we're only looking at the chart. So pretend we don't have the individual data. So let's pretend we have no individual data. Okay, so we have no individual data. So let's pretend we only have a chart. So, and then I'm going to show you another way that you can write your charts, which is kind of fun. Okay, so the classes, you still have your classes. Oh, is that a line here? Oh, I was trying to blow away that line. Okay, so this is classes here. And we're going to just keep adding things as we need to. We'll have our frequency. You wouldn't need the tally if you didn't have the data, right? You just have the frequency. And then we're going to have more rows, more columns. Okay, so this one, I'm going to show you another way. This bracket, so bracket is for less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to, and a parenthesis is for less than or greater than. I'm not sure if we've used interval notation before, but this is called interval notation. Okay. So starting at 3 and then ending at 4, but don't include 4 would mean 4 needs a parenthesis. And then this is 4 and then 5 parentheses. But you are allowed to do it the other way. It's totally fine if you have the less than or equal to signs as well, if that makes you happier. Okay, and then this is, so this is, I'm just copying the same data, not the same data, but the same group frequency table here. Okay, so we're going to have the same numbers. 1, that's not a 14, that's a 4. So just copying the data that we had before. 15, 7, 9, 1. So let's say we only saw this data and we wanted to decide on some things. There's going to be one important thing. It's called the mid-interval. Okay, and the mid-interval is going to allow us, this column helps us estimate the mean. So remember, this is if we didn't have the individual data. Okay, now what it is is the mid-interval is the average of the class boundaries. Okay, so class boundaries. Okay, so the class boundaries, the lower boundary and the upper boundary of a class is basically when you look at these two values, the yellow would be the lower boundary and the 4 would be the upper boundary. Okay, so just for some terminology. Let me undo that. Okay, so the mid-interval, what you do is you average. Okay, you're going to average. In this case, we're going to average the 3 and the 4. Okay, so this would be, I'm going to just put the calculation. Oops, I'm still in highlighter mode. Hold on, let me get out of highlighter mode. Okay, so this is 3 plus 4 divided by 2. It's the average, so that's 3.5. And then this would be, let me put a little line here. And then this would be 4 plus 5 divided by 2. But in order to do this, you do need to close the gaps. Okay, so you do need to close the gap. So if there's a gap, then this doesn't exactly work in the same way. Okay, so 5.5, and I'll show you possibilities later on this. So this is 6.7. This is 7.5. Oops, 6.7. That's not true. So average, that'd be 6.5, and this is 8.5. Okay, so those are the mid-intervals. They're called the mid-intervals. And you're going to use this column, use, to estimate the mean. Now, what I like to do, okay, so there's a few different ways to do the mean of a frequency chart. Let me show you the standard way, and then I'll show you the way that I prefer. Okay, so there's two ways. Either way is fine. So this is the mean of a frequency chart. Okay, so mean of a frequency chart. Basically, what you're going to use is, it says here in yellow, there's 1, 3.5. And then there's 4, 4.5s. And then there's 15, 5.5s. So we're using, because we don't know what the data itself is, that's why we're doing, why we're pretending that every value in the 3 to 4 class is 3.5. So that's kind of what we're doing. Okay, so this would be, if you were doing a mean, you would do what? 3.5 plus, I would do 4.5, but how many 4.5s do I have? I have 4, just so you can visually kind of see how this goes. Plus, I'm going to write 5.5 plus 5.5, right? How many 5.5s do I actually have? So this is, I have 15 of these, right? 15 of these, plus 6.5, I've got 6.5, I've got a bunch of 6.5s. How many of those do I have? I have 7 of these. And then I have 7.5s, right? So 7.5 plus a bunch of 7.5s. I have 1 8.5. How many of the 7.5s do I have? I have 9 of them. And then when you divide, so think of this as you're trying to find the mean. So here's the mean. Okay, and this is called a weighted average. So this is the weighted average method. Okay, so this is the weighted average method. And then you divide by the total number of things that you have in the list. So I have 9 here. I have 1 over here. I have 7. I have 15. I have, what, 4 of these. I have 1 of these. Okay, so we can find that number. I'm going to write it in red under the frequency column. So I'm going to use a summation sign. Okay, so n is the summation of all the f's. Okay, so n is what I'm going to divide by. So the sum of all the f's, we said earlier there were 37. So I'm going to put 37 on the bottom. Now, if you want to do it this way, you wouldn't have to write it out the way I'm writing it out. You would write 3.5 plus 4 4.5s, right? Plus 15 5.5s, plus 7 6.5s, plus 9 7.5s, plus 8.5, divided by 37. And that would be the mean. Okay, the mean of the data. Okay, or, and then you get a value, right? You get some value. Okay, or what I like to do is I change the chart to a probability distribution. Okay, so I like to do it this way. This was P5, I think. Okay, so P5. In the P's, what did we do? How did we find the mean when we were in the P's? Remember we wrote expected value? What was the formula? Summation, right? The E was like a summation. Summation of x times P of x. Okay, so if I look at, so you would do the x, this would be the mid-interval. Okay, so this would be the mid-interval. But how do you find the P of x? So how am I going to find the P of x? Okay, so if we go back up, so let's think creatively. So how are we going to find a P of x? Okay, what you can do, and I'm going to add this in red, is you can add another column on to, oops, that's not red. Okay, so you're going to add another column and call it P of x. Okay, so you're going to call this column P of x. And how can I get probabilities from frequencies? And then technically I have a probability table that also has frequencies in it as well. So this would be 1 out of n. N is 37. I should erase these lines here. It looks like the absolute value of the frequency. So let me put n as the summation of the frequency, which in this case is 37. Okay, so this is 4 out of 37, 15 out of 37, 7 out of 37, 9 out of 37, and 1 out of 37. Okay, so then if you're going to do that, what you would do is hopefully you can still, let's see if you can, I'll zoom out so you can see the chart. Okay, so this would be, and hopefully you're writing this down and pausing, make sure you're pausing. I'm back here at the bottom. X is my mid-interval, which is 3.5. And then I multiply it by my P of x, which is 1 over 37. And then I take my 4.5 and I multiply it by my mid-interval. And then I take my 5.5 times my probability. I take my next mid-interval, 6.5. And remember, we're just pretending we don't know the data in the class. So we're using the middle to represent all values. Okay, and it is an estimate. Plus 7.5 times, what's that number? 9 over 37. Plus 8.5 times 1 over 37. Okay, now if you notice, if you actually look at the numerators, numerator, 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 and then I'll highlight the denominators, right? It really is the same calculation as this one, right? It's the same thing. It's just a different way to think about it. So whichever way you prefer is fine. Equals. And then just type that into your calculator and see what you get. Okay. So let's see. Let's see what we want to do next. Cumulative frequency. You know, I'm going to do that in another video. So I'm going to stop this video. This is almost 30 minutes. So we're going to do cumulative frequency. And cumulative frequency is pretty cool. So we're going to do a cumulative frequency. But let's do that in a different video. Okay, so you could probably start some of the questions if you wanted. Or you can wait. I want to show you how to close the gaps. So I'll be able to show you that later as well. Okay, I decided I probably should show you how to close the gaps in this one because that's not really a cumulative frequency thing. So let me show you how to close the gaps, okay, because that's related to this. Close the gaps. You know, this is just my first group of videos, so I'm not very good at this yet. Okay, so let me show you if you have this 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, and 20 to 24, and 25 to 29. Okay, so let's say those are your classes. Okay, so imagine those are your classes. You can't just average the numbers to get the mid-interval because you really don't have classes that touch. So you have this big gap from 4 to 5. Okay, so there's different ways to bridge the gap. One way is the way that I learned. I learned that you go forward and backwards. We'll do that backwards one in a minute. But basically forward, you go forward a half and backwards a half. Forward a half, backwards a half. Okay, this one just looks weird. So this is negative 0.5. So this one is forward a half, backwards a half. Okay, forward a half, backwards a half. Backwards a half, forwards a half. Okay, so now one thing that's kind of sad is you guys aren't here to say, hey, Miss Nichols, you made a mistake. You made a typo. So I got to be more careful because I'm thinking, if I wrote one of these wrong, you guys would definitely tell me if we were in class. Okay, so basically what you're doing is you're making a new class boundary. So you're doing like negative 0.5 to 4.5, and then you're doing 4.5 to 9.5. Usually people don't write it brand new though. They just kind of write the numbers, off to the side so they can see what they are. So these would be the ones that would be your actual class intervals. Okay, your upper and your lower bounds. Your upper lower bounds would be the 0.5s. And you could choose where to put the bracket and the parenthesis. So on the last one, I put the bracket on the left and the parenthesis on the right. But it's possible, definitely possible, if you want to switch them. Okay, so you can absolutely put it this way as well. Okay, and when you're doing a cumulative frequency graph, you do want to have the bracket on the right instead of the left. So we'll talk about that when we do the cumulative frequency in the next video. Okay, so if you were trying to find the mid-interval, okay, that would be negative 0.5 plus 4.5 divided by 2. Okay, and in this case it's 2, which is the average between 0 and 4. But you really have to close the gap by going forward and backwards if you want to do that. What some people do, okay, and it's kind of up to you, is you can choose to make it like this, bracket, and then I don't pick 4. I change it to 5, and I just kind of move everybody up. Okay, so I could do this, and then 5 to 9, parenthesis. So this is another way to close the gap. Okay, so you could close the gap this way. I've seen, except that wouldn't be 9 then, right? That would be 10. Okay, and then basically you pick the lower bound of the next one. The lower bound of the next one. So the lower bound of the next one would be 15. So you can also do this, which is harder when you're tallying. But, well, neither one of the decimal one or this one, those are harder when they're tallying. It's kind of nice to say 0 to 4, 5 to 9 if there's no decimals between 4 and 5. So you could see where that would be an issue. Now, if you did this, your mid-intervals would be different, right? So this mid-interval would be 7.5, which is 5 plus 10 divided by 2. And this mid-interval would be 2.5, which is 0 plus 5 divided by 2. So it does change your mid-intervals, and we're only estimating. So we're estimating regardless. This estimate would be higher than the other estimate. So it's very interesting. Now, there is a word called class width. Okay, class width. If there's no gaps, the class width makes sense. Okay, you go sideways. So for this one, the class width would be 5, 5, 5. That makes sense. Up here, it would be 5, 5, 5. But when you have gaps, okay, so if you look at this data, it appears that the class width is 4 because 4 minus 0 is 4, but that's not considered the class width. So the safest way to do the class width would be from 1 to the next one. So I'm looking at my 0 and my 5. That would be plus 5. And then 5 to 10 would be plus 5. So those are called class widths. And no matter how the data is presented, if you go from one to the next, like the lower bound to the next lower bound, or the upper bound to the next upper bound, okay, the class widths do make sense. 4 to 9 is plus 5 also. 9 to 14 is plus 5 also. So even though it's called class width, I really don't go sideways. I usually go 1 to the next number, so I don't have to close the gap if they're just asking me for the class width, or if they tell me a class width. So sometimes they'll tell me a class width. They'll say my lowest number is, say, 12. And they say class width equals 4. And I'm thinking, okay, well, how do I do that? So if I go 12 to 16, 17 to 21, this is actually wrong. Okay, so because this 12 to 17 is plus 5, and I really wanted plus 4. So if I'm going to do this situation, so this way does not work. So what I do is I start with 12, and then I do all my fronts. I do all my lower bounds, and then I do the next lower bound. Okay, and then I do the next lower bound. And the only reason somebody would tell you what to do is, like, say, we teachers, we're going to give you a test, and if people choose different bounds, then we're not going to be able to check if your tallies are right. Okay, so if you were going to do this and this was in your table, so imagine this was in your table. Okay, so this is in your table here. Where would you stop? You'd stop at 15. And then, so first you do the front numbers, and then your next number would be stop at 19. Okay, which looks like a class width of 3. Okay, but it's not, because this one has gaps. So to me, if I'm making my own, I just make sure not to have gaps. So if I was going to make this one, see, it's even hard to kind of do this. So 27, that's not how I would choose to do it. What I would choose to do is I would say 12. I would do 16, but I would go up to 16 and then put a parenthesis. Or I would say 12 to 16, and then I would put a bracket and then a parenthesis. So this one would be, this means 12 is less than x, less than or equal to 16. And this one means 12 is less than or equal to x, less than 16. So that's what the bracket and the parentheses means. So I like to make it so my class width really is my, looks sideways. So that, 20 to 24, parenthesis, I start again at 24 because I'm doing the bracket parenthesis thing. So to me, this way is easier. And then my next one would be 28. So it's up to you. So I would suggest if you make your own, don't make gaps. So this would be suggested. Okay, because if you don't make gaps, then when you do the mid-interval, you can just average them and you're fine. And you don't have strange situations. Okay. Okay, well, it's good I'm done with this video because my cat's crying and she wants to get out. So anyway, I'll be doing a new video on the rest of S5, and that's going to be on cumulative frequency graphs.